sort of croaky today, and so my my usual mellifluous voice is probably not going to be available. I'll just have the water ready. Well, poets are having aha moments all the time, I think, and an aha moment that I had recently was when I was rereading a poem by William Butler Yeats, who, out of this book I bought when I was in England when I was 19, so it was a long time ago, and I still have the book of Yeats' poetry, and I loved his poetry, but I haven't read it much. So there was a ballad-like poem called "The Withering of the Boughs," and the refrain goes like this: "The boughs have not withered because of the wintry winds. The boughs have withered because I have told them my dreams." Mm-hmm. And then I really hadn't paid much attention to that before, but I thought, wow, that means that you're cursing the boughs if you tell them your dreams. That means the power of your words is to cause boughs to wither, you know? And this is, what kind of a world is it that has this kind of curse? And so then I thought, well, what if it were, the boughs have not withered because of the wintry winds. The boughs have withered because I have not told them my dreams. And you know, that's another whole way of looking at things. It's kind of like fables versus fairy tales. And so I realized from years and years of reading fairy tales and myths and folk tales and looking into anthropology and so on, that those are really two worldviews. You get a dichotomy quite often in what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And you're supposed to ask the question, what is your suffering? Or you're supposed to keep your mouth shut. And the thing is, sometimes you don't know which. And so I'm going to read you a series of poems in which some of these myths and stories are kind of embedded, because I'm kind of infatuated. Saturated is the word I meant to use. I'm kind of saturated with them. So I'm going to start with a poem that has to do with asking and not asking. And it's kind of started off as a retelling of the Hansel and Gretel story, but then it kind of took off. And so there's a whole lot in here besides just Hansel and Gretel. Ask. First, there is weather. There is more weather than usual. The girl and boy abandon their bread to follow a squirrel between the trees, relax their hands, and the crumbs fall down as a small white snow. They do not trust their father, who dwindles into a breeze behind a row of firs. They abandon the squirrel to pick chanterelles drawn by the swirls of color in the dark. Closely followed by numbers even and odd, by whispers, intakes of breath, words curling under and breaking off at the ends, their glowing tips making tiny hisses in the gathering storm. They dance with their skirling shoes upon the rooted sod, believing they are lost and therefore safe. The boy and girl, wandering deep, come upon the truck of weeds, half sunk in the dreaming pond. Curled beneath its useless steering wheel, an angel dressed in blazing white. Shading their eyes, they see, through the window, a woman with bare feet, tiny as fawn's hoofs, the blindfold around her head, the laced and perfect half-moon of her folded wings. They are hungry now and do not pause to tap on the window, to wake her up, to ask for her story. Doubtless every forest harbors certain privacies of the sun. The girl and boy find a deserted house with a blackened iron cooking stove. They open cabinets, hoping for something to eat. Outside the forest, thunderclouds gather under the warm, molten dust of a pewter heaven. As it grows darker, the boy and girl empty their pockets onto the table. Their chanterelles are the color carrots would be if they were crossed with barley, left unmolested in unsullied air for 100 years, then rubbed and rubbed. They cannot take a knife to them. The Revenge of Beauty. Yes?
Can't hear very well.
You can't hear very well? Oh, maybe I should lean over like that?
Make more friends with the mic.
Okay, thank you. right, we'll try that.
Is that better?
Is that better?
I think so.
It's a little better. I have to be in just exactly the right spot. Okay. And along the line of fables, I'm going to read just a couple of poems from my little chapbook, And If the Dead Do Dream. This is another little fable-like poem that has a number of things feeding into it from different places. But mostly it's kind of, it turned out to be, I didn't start it out that way, but it's kind of a statement of solidarity with giants. Giants have been the bad guys for so long in fables, and so I just kind of am trying to make it different. And you'll hear that in the poem. It's not the main point of the poem. Practice fable. My house creaks at night, randomly, loudly, waking me up. And why? Unless the soil be mobile and the house stiff. And why? Unless the ground is leaving and the house trying to follow staggers. And why? Unless the earth's a giant turning in her sleep. My backside against the mattress all night, tiny earthquakes strum me. I know no story for this. What ails you, my house? Your limbs still wholly unfurlable. The giant moves beneath you, but will not waken until, what? She may greet guests at the door of her castle? You are that castle? There is no more wounded king? The house practicing in its sleep. And you know, I wrote that when I was living in a different place, and I moved, and sure enough, my new house also creaks. I don't know if anybody lives in a house that doesn't creak. You'd think they would have settled down by, the house was built in the 60s. Okay, one more for my book. This is a kind of origin myth. I guess you'd say it's an origin for the color green. And the title came to be first, and I thought, oh, that tells the whole story. I can't possibly write anymore. I mean, and then I wanted to make a poem, so I finally did. It's called Green is Water Somewhere Else. One day, water stepped out for a moment. After the hour, but before the minute. After blood, but before wine. Water went somewhere else, found permission to be away without notice there, without incurring the additional stigma of absence here. A price was paid. A price is always paid. On that day, the jungle, the meadow, the forest arrived, became, by courtesy, water without need, water held in escrow. Don't know if that's true or not, but sounds good.
Let me just try one thing and see how high I can go with this without squealing.
When I was a child, my father used to say he could hear me above all the other children down the street. But that's probably just because he was my father, not because my voice was loud. But he claimed it was because my voice was loud. Here's another kind of origin myth. I kind of had fun with this. I don't think I need to explain anything. Before and after. Once an enormous god with an enormous hand at the end of his long, skinny arm reached into the, way before anything else, cosmic mist and pulled out a squalling puppy by the scruff of the neck. This is not a fact. Every August, I lie on my back on a dark hill looking into the night sky. Sometimes I see a meteor that was not there, suddenly not there again. This must be how the world began, as an echo orphaned from its source. Today, a cabbage butterfly flew arrow straight across my kitchen window, heading east. Its path a line at exactly golden section between top and bottom of the frame. From across the room, remembering this, I wonder again, why are we not regularly struck by objects falling from overhead, as the yet unformed serve out their almost infinite sentences of improbability? How often swaths of fine mist must scrape against prickly wadges of atoms gone all widdershins and precipitate as something prior to a meteor? A clear bell sound in the air just below the ceiling of a busy restaurant during Sunday brunch? A puppy? Or a white butterfly's small galumph as quarter moon waxing into sunrise? I do wonder about that. This one is a more of a personal story that's also, I've turned it into mythology and story, fairy tale or whatever, to kind of get me through, because it was a difficult situation. And I'll just say briefly, my husband, who's no longer alive, Ted, and I were in Calgary, British Columbia, at a conference, and he had a heart incident during the night and had to go to the hospital, and I went in the ambulance with him, but then I took a taxi back so I could get a few hours sleep, and knowing they would call me if anything was happening. So this is what happens the next morning. Preposition. It's morning, so I must drive back to the hospital on my own. I know we crossed the river in the dark. The bridge was on 12th. The hotel's on 5th. Piece of cake. A block out of the parking garage, I arrive at the corner of 4th Street and 4th Avenue. Doing the logic, I turn the wrong way into a one-way street, backtrack to 3rd Avenue, hunker down beside the curb to breathe. Then the prepositions arrive. Each one a little metal chute, slick and dizzying, each one depositing me outside a different door. Door of indigo, door of styrofoam, door of fish whiskers no longer attached, door belonging to the Queen of Spades. Growing smaller and later behind my steering wheel, unable to pray, I think about the divine. If everything is divine, or at least alive, what about the non-things, like prepositions and questions? How long has it been since I was a cat? Is since a preposition? A preposition may be more like the Higgs boson than the Queen of Spades. And don't capitalize boson, for cripe's sake, or you may be doomed. Nor insert a hyphen between the two words, lest they get the wrong idea about their relationship. Nor place an apostrophe after Higgs to indicate possession. Here's the thing. The Higgs boson has no primary purpose. There's only secondary purpose. Only. I just now figured that out. Unlike the divine, maybe like the preposition, although I doubt it, exactly like this grid of unrelated streets with similar names. They would have called me if he were dying. Remember, the contract goes like this. You will have a short awakening, but it will be glorious. Or maybe it was frumious. He will get a kick out of that. It seems impossible to sit with secondary purpose for long. I will go one more block, turn around, and head for 12th Street. Or was it 12th Avenue? The river must be nearby. I did manage to get to the hospital, but no GPS for me. And this one is another poem that has some bits. Well, it's kind of based on the on myth, I guess, generally. Mm-hmm. And one thing that gets into my poems more than I would have thought is it's not a myth. It's the practice they used to have in China of binding women's feet in order to make them more attractive to men, and it crippled them, and it was very painful and just barbaric. And for some reason, that haunts me more than a lot of other things, for some reason. I don't know why. So it just got into this poem. The day arrives. Yesterday, that meadow along the highway was safely horizontal. A short, fat meadow gleaming greenly behind a managed forest of anorexic alders. Meadow with a belly on it, jolly but docile. Today, that meadow seems preoccupied. It rises, almost vertical behind the trees, flapping lightly, exposing stretch marks, stains, crushed nap smudges. Rabidly, it sops up the morning's yellow luminosity like a toast set loose among the eggs. The anemic grass alders are beginning to bend, almost to squint, turn their trunks around like owls, in a collective quake of anticipation. What day is this? Their roots have been bound for so long. Assuming they remember the terms of the original agreement, they still may stumble while they're walking out. I'd love to see that. Among other things. And here's one, a fairly recent poem. Like many of you, I worry about squirrels when they cross the road. And right now the squirrels are just going berserk. So this is called Keep, and could be a noun or a verb, keep. And there's a little epigraph, the dream-generated geography of the body. I love that phrase, the dream-generated geography of the body. It comes from Don Oscar Miro Quesada. He's a Peruvian shaman. If the squirrel starts to cross and the car keeps coming, if the squirrel pauses and the car keeps coming, there's an extra chamber behind the heart, carved out like a cave behind a waterfall. On a low shelf, my mother's love of violets. If the car veers, and the squirrel also. She told me once, I have this dream of a lion hiding in the closet. I couldn't tell if she was afraid. Into my rearview mirror, I have cried, no, no, for them, removing both hands from the steering wheel. If the sun went out for the length of time it takes a human to die for lack of breathing, 6 minutes. Is it hereditary, this fear of the dark? The day my mother slapped me in the face and we stood leaning together like two clocks with their counterweights cut, she must have taken my hand. And I have 2 more poems. This is what we call the 2-poem warning. And I think I'll, one of them is an abecedarius. It's the only one I've ever written, but it was a exercise, as they often are. And an abecedarius is a poem that it has 26 lines theoretically. Each one begins with the next letter of the alphabet. And of course, it's pretty easy to cheat because you can move words around. So I just kind of went crazy with this idea. And it starts off with the word achoo, like sneezing. And that's the way Hungarian storytellers used to start their stories, to get your attention. It's sort of like in Beowulf, I think the first word in there is like hoit or something, and that kind of means wake up, pay attention. And, okay. A broken abecedarius of how things might be if the world were saved. Achoo! At the beginning of a tale. Beasts wandering in daylight, unafraid of being shot. Even centaurs who would not be drunk anymore if invited to your wedding. A dragon or a dinosaur named Ellen. Flies who would go to the front screen door on command so you could let them out. Galumphing is the normal gait of soldiers. hazelnuts that fall one by one into the mouth of the salmon of wisdom, who swims beneath until the time comes for her to be caught by a wizard's apprentice and cooked over a slow fire until she has rendered up all the wisdom remaining in her unsung parts. But I digress. Intoxication once a day by the scent from white jasmine flowers tumbling over a garden wall, except for the keepers of butterflies who would need to remain sober. Loping as an alternate choice, CG above, galumphing. More respect for Dame Love, who has thoughtfully abolished reason. Nearly all the children reaching the house in the middle of the forest, where they will be temporarily changed into birds and introduced to their heart's desire by a very old bear who knows all the tales with caves in them. Pearls of music rolling around between the warm, uneven bricks under the chairs. Quiet. Regales of yellow leaves and the musk of grapes. Sisyphus, released from duty but staying on as a volunteer on weekends when he has time off from being a taxi driver in New York, something he always wanted to try. An upset victory by whim, who has finally convinced Stephen Hawking that she is indeed the final black hole into which and from which comes Xanadu, with its plazas and feasts, its gardens of endless endings, for which we have all secretly yearned, and to which we have spent the last million years zigging and zagging, CG above, and where we will arrive this very afternoon. I hope we've sort of been there this afternoon. And this last poem, it's called Another Reason, and I know many of you are environmentally aware and of the possibility of the sixth extinction and humans going extinct, and a lot of us sort of laugh and say, yeah, it's about time, the poor. But this is one of those poems about why we shouldn't. Another reason. The sky is always dark blue, tending toward lavender, when I remember and say, we should not go extinct. And each time this knowledge arrives like a silent taxi headlamp in the rain. This evening it comes in a black and white video of Grigory Sokolov playing a Bach partita, his soft white hair shining out of the preponderant dark as he hunches over the piano keys, his hands up and down, one after the other, each like a falcon rising through its precisely hollowed wind, then falling to its prey. His rounded shoulders enact the geometry he long ago committed to in secret prayer. The odd old bulk of him, the sweet mild eyebrows, speak of books and candles. But here is the orchard again, with its dark blue scent of rain and lavender coming up so close beside the house. Thanks.